Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the funeral service. We ask for those that are standing to please be seated. So, Brother Wild told me not to mention him because he's technically not officiating, just to mention you. Okay? We ask for those that have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. Officiating today is Rabbi Sidney Helbron.
Adonai ma adam v'tedaehu, ben enosh v'adchashvehu. Adam lehevel dama, yamav kitzel over. Baboker yatzitz v'chalaf, la'erev yimolel v'yavesh. Tashe v'enosh ad daka v'tomar shuvu v'nei adam. Lu chochmu yaskilu zot, yavinu la'acharitam, ki lo v'moto yikach hakol, lo yered acharav kvodo. Shmor tam or e yashar, ki acharit leish shalom. Podeh Adonai nefesh avadav, v'lo yeshmu kol hachosim bo. Adonai, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, "Return, O mortal creatures." Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted, and behold the upright. They shall have peace. Adonai, you redeem the souls of your servants, and none who trust in you shall be desolate. Death has taken our beloved Bennett Koffman. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God. Be with them. For Bennett's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For his companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bino desha yar bitseni, al me minuchot yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni v'magalet tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begei tzal mavet, lo ira ra, ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorai, dishanta vashemen roshi, kosi rivaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti bevet Adonai le'orech yamim. Those are the words of the 23rd Psalm, which you can find on the inside of the handout. I invite you to read it with me now. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Esa einai el haharim, me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, osei shamayim va'aretz. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai Natan, Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach. Job cried, God has given and God has taken away, but blessed be the name of God. In ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with a valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai Natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai Lakach, God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love, as we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. We take a moment now for silent remembrance. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Before I begin my eulogy, I wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge the presence of Rabbi Weisberg, the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Bethel, who first introduced me to Elaine and Bennett. He said, there's the story. He might not have said it quite this way, but he said there's that story of Jacob when he lies down and he sees this ladder that stretches to heaven. And the Torah says, and there are angels ascending and descending the ladder. And the question the rabbis ask is, why weren't they descending first? And Rabbi Weisberg said, There are angels in our congregation. There are angels in our congregation, and he was right. So we're grateful for your presence and the presence of Rabbi Weil and Cantor Cahan, who are joined us as well. The Talmud tells us that when Rabbi Yochanan finished reading the book of Job, he said, "The end of man is death, and the end of cattle is slaughter. Indeed, everything is destined to die. Thus, blessed is one who is raised according to the values of the law, whose labors were for the sake of those values, whose deeds were pleasing to his Creator, and was known for the good name he established. For when he departs this earth, his name will be remembered for good." It was for one who lives in this manner that Solomon declared, "A good name is better than precious oil, and the day of death is better than the day of one's birth." While Bennett Koffman may not have considered himself a religious man, there is no question that the way he carried himself and the actions he undertook, living thoughtfully, carefully, and humbly, looking after those he encountered along the way, as well as those he never had the opportunity to meet, that Bennett brought blessings to all of God's creatures, large and small, and established a name that will ever be remembered for good. Bennett Koffman was born 81 years ago in 1941, the firstborn child of his parents Lou and Dorothy, and grew up with his siblings David and Jennie in Falls Church, Virginia, and Cumberland, Maryland. Bennett was an excellent student who liked to understand how things worked and developed a passion for reading, chess, and ham radio. At a time when there were quotas limiting the number of Jews who would be accepted to a university, not only was Bennett admitted to Northwestern, he received financial assistance as well. It was here, at a Hillel event, that Bennett first met Elaine. It was an event that neither of them would have gone to on their own, but both of their mothers had told them to go, and they were both accustomed to listening to their mothers. When the event ended, Bennett, Elaine, and another girl left together, walking towards the dorms, where Elaine was invited to see what dorm life was like. Elaine enjoyed her visit and spent a good amount of time inside before she happened to look out the window and see that Bennett was still outside, apparently waiting for her. But Elaine was in no hurry to leave, and Bennett eventually gave up and wandered off. But he didn't leave without a plan. He knew that the school published a student directory and decided that he would call Elaine when he received it. And true to his plan, Bennett followed through. That's how Ben and Elaine became a couple. While Bennett and Elaine's academic careers followed similar paths, they traveled in different directions. After Ben graduated from Northwestern, he got his PhD in government from the University of Virginia and began teaching at Mary Williams College in Fredericksburg. Meanwhile, Elaine got her PhD and worked for a year at Rutgers Institute of Cognitive Studies. And yet, while they lived some distance from each other, there was never a doubt in either of their minds that they would marry. As Bennett's brother, David, told Pauline, Bennett only had eyes for Elaine. And eventually, after she accomplished her academic goals and had begun her career, they decided the time was right for them to marry. It was around this time, while working as the assistant manager for the city of Fredericksburg, that Bennett began studying to become a CPA. In the midst of the process, Elaine's father passed away. And a short time later, Elaine and Bennett moved to Chicago, into the lower level of Estelle's home, which was remodeled into an apartment. It was here that Bennett and Elaine's family began to grow, with the arrival of Pauline and Vera and Shira. By the time they were ready to move out, some 7 years later, the house that backed to Estelle's was on the market, and they bought it. Bennett, like the rest of his family, was blessed by his closeness to Estelle, who was equally blessed by him. By now, Bennett was well established in his career and ready to move on from his first accounting job with Thomas W. Havey and Company. He took a job as the manager of the partnership accounting at the law firm of Mayer Brown, where he remained for 28 years until he retired in 2010. Throughout his career, Bennett was a respected professional who rose early to take the train to work and arrived home around 7 o'clock each night. He was also a dedicated family man who was present for every important event in the life of his children and was as loving, caring, and supportive of Elaine as she was of him. During their childhood years, Pauline and Shira have fond memories of summer road trips out to Virginia to visit Grandma Dorothy and Grandpa Lou and spend time with Uncle David and Aunt Jennie, as well as trips to the national parks across the Midwest and Canada, where they stayed in cabins. As the years passed, Bennett and Elaine were blessed to see Pauline marry Doug, and they were blessed by the arrival of their granddaughter, Tewa, who brought great joy into their lives. And they quelled when Shira and Lisa became partners. While there is no question that Elaine and Bennett completed each other, it's also true that Ben was a self-sufficient man. He had a curious mind and never stopped learning. He was organized and handy and could fix just about anything. He had a love of animals and raised 2 sets of well-trained and well-groomed dogs. And when there were opportunities to make a difference in the lives of others, Bennett never hesitated. Be it a foster child he and Elaine supported from the time they married, or the close relationship he shared with Bol Kaveda, which turned into a true friendship, or the many charitable causes he supported throughout his life, performing simple acts of loving kindness was ingrained in his soul, whether it was helping people with their tax returns, or picking up those who were homebound and driving them to temple, or assisting Elaine on her many, many social action projects, or making weekly water deliveries to a friend. When Ben saw an opportunity to be of service, he never hesitated. And yet Bennett sought no accolades or acclaim for his actions. In fact, he'd likely be uncomfortable that I've mentioned them at all. He was much more comfortable with quiet actions, being the man behind the camera, taking pictures of others, rather than being the one out front. But there is no question that he was equally responsible for making sure that the task was done. Throughout his life, Bennett took good care of himself. He and Elaine ate well, becoming pescatarians about 20 years ago, and he made fitness a regular part of his daily routine. These habits brought rewards of their own, enabling him to be active and live well for as long as he was able. Yet, as Rabbi Yochanan suggested earlier, no one lives forever. And during these last years, Bennett and Elaine faced serious challenges. But through it all, Bennett continued to live his best life, never complaining, continuing to give and share, helping Elaine learn new skills, preparing her to handle the life changes that would inevitably come. Yes, despite his illness, Bennett continued to live in the same manner he always had, reaching out to those around him and making a difference in their lives. Bennett Koffman was a guten neshama, a mensch, a man who gave with his heart and hands, seeking no applause, doing what was right because he could, and living in a way that earned him a name that will ever be remembered for good. Bennett Koffman was a good son and brother, a loving and devoted husband, a caring father, a proud grandfather, a respected professional, a lifelong learner, a doer, a good neighbor and friend. He was a man who seized the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others in ways large and small, and he left this world a better place because of his presence in it. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. The memory of Bennett Koffman will ever be a blessing. And let us say, Amen. I'd like to invite Rabbi Jeffrey Weil to share a few memories of Bennett and then his daughters, Pauline and Shira.
Shukach, Rabbi Hale Brown, and thank you so much for permitting me to share a few thoughts. I'm honored to be here. Said the blue-eyed young man to the brown-eyed young woman, "Your eyes remind me," and that's definitely a promising way to begin a sentence as young love was blooming. And one awaits what the young man would say next, the poetic metaphor to follow. And so he forged ahead. "Your eyes remind me of my beagle Frisky." Okay, interesting. Yet he was not done. He felt the sentence needed more. "Your eyes remind me," said young Bennett Koffman to young Elaine Cooper, "of my beagle Frisky who died." And that, friends, is how you launch a 60-plus year beautiful romance. Elaine took it in stride, for she really knew what kind of man this was. A brilliant, kind, sensitive young man who would become an eternally loving, unceasingly helpful, supremely dedicated husband. Bennett demonstrated his love for Elaine in many ways. It was not just compliments about doggy eyes and, Elaine, I'm sorry, about bony shoulders, another of Ben's early observations of his beloved. He also adopted the romantic touch of bringing home flowers, several bouquets of flowers to Elaine every Friday. As Elaine said, in your way of using words so wonderfully, he was a good flower chooser. He was also a good wife chooser. And you, Elaine, a good husband chooser. You both chose well. For Ben and Elaine were two halves of a whole. They complemented each other, as Rabbi Hale Brown noted. Ben, for instance, was handy. He was organized, good with technology. For Elaine, the educator, and as an educator might say, these are developing skills. Meanwhile, Elaine opened up worlds for Bennett. She brought him, for instance, into shul. When Elaine's mom, Estelle Cooper of blessed memory, passed away, Elaine lost her temple partner. And so Ben took that role over, attending Beth El its social action events, which Elaine has led for so long, joining her at services as well. And over the last few years, during the pandemic, I loved hearing both of your voices on Zoom at the end of services, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Bennett's Shabbat Shalom, when he would say it, and he said it every Friday night along with Elaine to the assembled folks who were virtual or in person, his Shabbat Shalom, his voice was so warm and sincere. It had this modesty to it and this friendliness to it, just like the man. Prior to the pandemic, on a Friday night, I gave a sermon about acorns that I had found in my neighborhood, how numerous and how diverse those acorns were. I had brought examples that night of the acorns. I still have those very acorns. They've been in my office on my shelf ever since. They looked like this. And I showed them. It was a show and tell reflection of acorns. I'm not sure exactly what I said about the acorns, but I'm honored, and I've been honored, that Bennett Koffman, so deeply himself appreciative of nature, appreciated my reflections, my sermon about acorns. Elaine and Bennett have both been, in the most direct way, connected to nature, hands in the earth. Yes, in many ways, they have been planters. And what they planted over 60 plus years has grown, has expanded, has yielded such produce, such goodness. The goodness of their wonderful family, which has expanded, reaching toward the lights, and been loved being Tewa's kako, brought him such great joy. The goodness of sturdy branches and still more branches of relationships, neighbors, friends, co-workers, students, fellow congregants, grateful rabbis and cantors. The goodness in the creation of a loving home for happy and cared for doggies. The goodness in the building of shelter, shade, through his and their acts of kindness, their tzedakah, their chesed, to strangers and friends alike, as Rabbi Helbron mentioned as well. And the goodness of the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, that they shared, that is their marriage, their sanctified partnership, which thrived like a tree, yielding its fruit in season, season after season, year after year, decade upon decade, sustaining, protecting, complementing, teaching, supporting, loving each other. Amen. Thank you.
I'm Pauline Woodson, the eldest daughter of Ben and Elaine. My dad was born in Mississippi, where my granddad was working as a civil engineer. He grew up for several years before college in Falls Church, Virginia, outside Washington, and he's the eldest of 3 children, including my Uncle David and my Aunt Jennie, both of whom I'm very grateful could fly out and make it here with us today. My dad headed off to Northwestern in 1959, the same year as my mom. I think I'm going to have some repeat from yours. Both were encouraged by their moms, as I imagine many moms of Jewish students did in the day, to attend a party at Hillel and meet other Jewish students. They were 17 and 18 years old and began dating that year. 11 years and 6 degrees later, They were married in Virginia and moved to Chicago shortly before my birth in 1972. Growing up, I had many friends whose fathers had big booming voices or larger than life personalities. My dad was almost the opposite of that: calm, measured, soft-spoken, rarely angered, thoughtful, sometimes even shy. The type of person who had many accomplishments and experiences and a lot of knowledge, but you had to typically ask and speak with him for a while to gain insight into all that he knew. My dad has 3 daughters. I'm not sure if he had once hoped one of us would be a boy, but you'd never know it if he did. He was the perfect girl dad. He had positive relationships with all of us. He always had an active presence in our lives, whether that was reading to us when we were little, supporting our academics, our music, our sports, and all interests, and he definitely never considered there would be any limits on what we could do or become. Neither did he try to push us into studying or working on something we didn't love, nor did he try to mold us into being similar. My dad really enjoyed being an Akako grandfather in the Sidama language from Ethiopia and having lots of fun with my daughter Tewa. They did so many fun activities together. One of her favorite memories being seeing the butterflies at the Peggy Nonabart Nature Museum. He and my mom took her everywhere, from museums to shows to parades, and also supported her sports, first baseball, and then her passion, volleyball. I know my dad loved fishing, and Tewa as a teenager now also loves fishing. And I really wish they had had that opportunity to enjoy that together. They're both gentle and relaxed people and would have really had a great time with it. My dad was the type of person who always wanted to give more and take less. He truly believed in giving to charities of all types, and he enjoyed doing a lot of volunteer work, like filing taxes for those in need, volunteering at the Uptown Cafe, and tutoring immigrants in English. For several years, I would hear of him working on practicing English with a student named Bull, who I never met. His tutoring work ended up having a coincidental and lovely connection with my life and my dad's. One evening, my parents happened to tell me on the phone that Bull was scheduled for his citizenship test and interview at the USCIS office downtown, my workplace. Unfortunately, when he arrived, the appointment was canceled because of a computer system failure. But he told my dad that a nice woman with blonde hair had come into the waiting room and patiently answered his questions. That kind woman assured him that everyone would be rescheduled within a few weeks. And my mom and dad didn't make the connection. But when I heard the story, I knew it was me. And I was gratified to know that I had successfully eased a vulnerable person's concerns. And several weeks later, I was really delighted to hear from my parents that Bull had come back, passed his tests, and was scheduled for his naturalization ceremony. So through that experience, I definitely felt connected to my dad through the intersection of our daily lives. And I'd like to think that some of my patience and empathy with Bull that day, even though it was a really difficult work day, was a direct result of my father's example. My dad's tutoring made a huge impact, and it's a great way to encapsulate his humanity. His relationship with Bull grew so deep that he and Bull became great friends. In addition to fishing, my dad was an overall lover of nature and the outdoors, and a fitness enthusiast. He enjoyed hikes, exercise of all types, and spending time outdoors. We took vacations to state and national parks. We took lots of pictures of those enjoyable trips from my earliest days as a child, even including one of them with me at about age 2 at a Virginia National Park, during which my parents, my mom and dad, put me in a child harness and leash, a parenting decision that would surely raise eyebrows today for my very first, very safe mountain walk. I also remember even earlier memories of being carried around outdoors in a backpack on my father's back. Speaking of fitness and health, many of you know my father fell ill about 3 years ago. During the vast majority of that time, he was upbeat and had a pretty good quality of life. I believe that his outstanding health up until then really gave him the opportunity to beat the odds in many respects, and he had amazing doctors at Northwestern Hospital, so I'm thankful for them. And I also appreciate the supplemental assistance he received from his caregiver, Sue. But last and most of all, I want to acknowledge my mother. Mom, I know you wanted more time with Dad, but know that you dedicated 24 hours a day, every day to his care, a reflection of your dedication of 52 years of marriage together. I'm sure Dad is resting easy because of it and knows everything you did for him. And while I know right now things are not okay, reflecting on your time together, especially in these past 3 years, I hope that you can also rest easy in your heart as well. Thank you.
My beloved father, Jeannie to those who knew him as a kid, Bennett as a grown man, Wossel to his wife, was not a suave guy. He was a CPA, manager of partnership accounting, with a bit of a stutter, a fashion sense that ran toward a yellow Cheerios t-shirt and khaki shorts, and who used real cloth handkerchiefs his whole life. One of my mother's favorite stories about him was their first date together in college, where an 18-year-old Bennett Koffman wrapped an arm around the shoulders of a 17-year-old Elaine Cooper in the back of her father's car and said, "Mr. Cooper, your daughter has very bony shoulders." To which, naturally, her father replied, "And who asked you to touch my daughter's shoulders?" Dad was a sweet guy, a mensch. The father I remember growing up worked hard, loved his family, and stole what time he could for quiet pursuits in his den or in the basement. He studied chess and bridge. He talked to people all around the world on that ham radio. He loved hard science fiction, the kind that was actually about the science, and had aspirations of writing his own novel. He read thick scholarly tomes about the Civil War. When he could, he caught a game on the television in the family room. But he had so many other personal adventures, and I know I only know a small fraction of the life he lived. I know that as a young man that he joined the last leg of Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on the Capitol, though Dad did say that no, he had not really been able to hear the I Have a Dream speech. It had apparently been very noisy if you were in the crowd, and who knew it was going to be famous. And I know that in grad school, he flew down to Columbia to discuss politics with the Coffee Growers Association and lived there for 6 months. I know that when he was in his 60s, he flew out on a little twin-prop airplane to Bush, Alaska to come and see me. Not because he had any real fascination with small-town life up north, but pretty much just to make sure I didn't need rescuing in case I was being eaten by wolves on the tundra. Not that he ever really talked about any of this stuff without prompting. And as my mother's been recalling to everyone in the last week, He was patient, and he was kind. He was the one who did all the dog training. And to anyone who's ever tried to train a dog to heel or shake or sit stay, you know the endless patience required for that. He did volunteer work at a non-for-profit that got picture books to disadvantaged youth, doing the bookkeeping there, and volunteered at the Center for Economic Progress, doing taxes for people who couldn't afford a CPA, and most of whom are trying to figure out the US tax documents with limited English proficiency. Another of my mother's favorite stories of him was just a few years ago when they'd gone to high holiday services, and in the parking lot, a shul friend came hurrying up to them. The woman's mother, who was not quite herself because of dementia, was refusing to get out of the car. So Dad went over and just hung out with her for a while. Just talked, or, knowing Dad more likely, just listened. And after a while, the two of them came out and joined the others. When asked how he did it, how he got her to come, Dad said, "I was just patient." The last 2 years have been difficult ones. The cancer and the treatment of the cancer affected his premotor cortex and, of course, his immune system. And then in perfect timing, that was when the pandemic hit. I don't think any of us got to see my dad as much as we would have liked to the last few years. But he tried to stay active. He sorted the charitable contributions. He found a Spanish language application he wanted to try. And of course, he walked endless laps of the house in a walker and a gait belt trying to get better. That last round of chemo was a real doozy, though. When I saw him 2 days before he passed, he was exhausted and frustrated, but he still hugged me and said he loved me. I like to think of him in better times, though. Maybe in the basement at his workbench, cutting the stems of the flowers he always bought my mother for Shabbos, or working out on the Norda track in the family room, catching part of a Bears game, or on the patio, teaching me how to use power tools while we put up his meticulously organized sukkah, or on the wall of his home in Lincolnwood, there's a picture my mother painted from a family vacation. In that picture, he's on a beach with the Esky dogs, probably after a good long walk, smiling in the sunshine. I'd like to think of him that way. Thank you.
Such incredibly beautiful remembrances from everyone. Thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to invite Cantor Adam Cahan to join me now as we continue our service and prepare for our prayer of remembrance, El Malei Rachamim. Into your care, O God, we entrust the spirit of Bennett Koffman. For you keep faith with your children in death as in life. Sustain us that we may meet with serenity the mysteries that lie ahead, knowing that when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you, God, are with us, a loving friend in whom we put our trust. You are the light of our life, our hope in eternity. Please rise.
El Malei Rachamim shochein b'maromim Hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanvei hashchina im kiroshim torim כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. ונשמות בנימין ציון בן לודבורה שלח לעולמו. בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו. ינוחו בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Bennett Koffman, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Can be seated for a moment.
This concludes the funeral service here in the chapel. The interment will take place at Memorial Park Cemetery. For those who will be joining the family procession, we'll be lining up in our parking lot. We ask to have your headlights and hazard lights on while in procession and drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you. At the conclusion of the interment, the family will be sitting Shiva at Shira and Norman Eliezer residence, 4033 Greenwood, today until 6:30 p.m., Wednesday from noon to 5 p.m., and then services on both days will be at 1 p.m. The following individuals have been asked to act as pallbearers: Doug Woodson, Tewa Woodson, Susan Baldry, Lisa Hale, Bradley Goodman, Steve Sainor, Norman Eliezer, and Shira Eliezer. If we can all rise and have all the pallbearers please come forward as we escort the family, the clergy, and the casket from the chapel.
עושה שלום במרומה, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומה, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו